Hey guys, what's up, Alex here. Welcome back to another video, and this video is going to be looking at 5 tracks I personally think that the FIA should take off the 2019 Formula 1 calendar, because over the last couple of weeks we've been talking about tracks I think we should sort of bring back to Formula 1. There are so many tracks out there that are really interesting and they've been replaced by these massive autodromes which don't provide fantastic racing, and in today's video I want to talk through some autodromes and some old classic tracks I personally feel should be removed from the F1 calendar to provide some better racing. So if you agree with them or not, please leave a comment down below. Of course, these are just opinions, so please understand that. I'm not having a go at any certain track if you like it or dislike it. I just always want to make that clear before I start the video. But anyway, let's jump into this with the first one. So a track I've never been particularly fond of is the Spanish Grand Prix track in Catalonia. I don't feel this track normally provides fantastic racing. It always seems to end up in a bit of a procession. Of course, there are years when it doesn't exactly go like that and there are some interesting races, but I always feel it's kind of inevitable what's going to happen at this track because it sort of blends into a pattern over the first couple of laps, and that's how it's going to end. Of course, we have had some interesting races in the past. I can think of 2012, for example, and of course 2016 when Verstappen won it. That was a little bit unpredictable, but that was only because both Mercedes crashed into each other. But in general, I feel there are much better tracks out there in the world that could replace this Spanish track and provide us with some better racing. But of course, that's personal opinion, but I think the Spanish track is definitely one I would personally take off the calendar because I feel like in general the racing isn't quite as good as some of the other tracks on the calendar. The next one on my list is Hungary. Now, of course, like with Spain, they're both sort of old classic tracks in a way. They're not autodromes. Spain may be a little bit more like an autodrome, but the Hungarian track is a bit more of a classic track. It's nearly a street track in many ways, and of course that does provide some interesting moments, obviously when people are trying to go for risky overtakes. But I think the problem I have with the Hungaroring is there's just so little overtakes in this race. Of course, if weather comes into play, then there will be overtakes as with any track, but when it's just a dry race, I really do struggle with this track because it just doesn't provide interesting racing in my opinion. Now, of course, some may disagree, but I feel like this is probably one of the more boring tracks on the calendar, and that's probably more down to the fact that it is such a tight track and there are very limited places for overtaking. And I feel that if you had the 2017 or 2018 cars there without DRS, you might struggle to see any overtakes there whatsoever. And of course, there are many critiques of the DRS system as well in Formula 1. So personally, I would get rid of the Hungaroring. I still want a race in Hungary and a race in Spain, but I guess there aren't many opportunities in Hungary for a Grand Prix track, so it probably would be at Budapest if it was anywhere. But Spain, I feel like they've probably got better tracks out that they'd be slightly better suited for Formula 1, but maybe Catalonia is the one that they feel is the best just because obviously it's near one of the bigger cities in the country. But Spain and Hungary, I feel like both of them, they sort of just lack something that some of the other classics, maybe like Spa or Monza or even Silverstone. Silverstone could be on this list because Silverstone does provide some pretty dull races from time to time and isn't the most interesting track in the world. But Spain and Hungary, yeah, probably a little bit more boring than both of those. Now, the next one on this list is one that gets mentioned a lot when people talk about tracks that should be taken off the calendar, and that is the Sochi Autodrome in Russia. Now, don't get me wrong, I feel like we should have a Grand Prix in Russia. There are a lot of talented Russian drivers coming through the ranks over the last couple of years, and I guess that's thanks to people maybe like Vitaly Petrov, who first got into Formula 1 as Russian drivers, and obviously people like Daniil Kvyat getting on the podium, maybe to a lesser extent Sergei Sorokin, but still a Russian presence in Formula 1 is definitely helping younger Russian drivers come through the ranks who look genuinely really talented and could go on to be big things in Formula 1. So I feel like we should have a race in Russia. It kind of makes me disappointed that we haven't had even just one race in Scandinavia, really, because obviously loads of Finnish drivers in the sport. We've got Kevin Magnussen and so many other talented drivers from like Sweden, for example, in the sport, maybe in the lower categories. But I feel like we should be going to tracks where there is a presence of really high quality drivers. So to my point, I feel like Russia should stay on the calendar, but I think the Sochi Autodrome probably isn't really the place for it. I'm not a fan of autodromes in the first place because they're just very wide open tracks where if you make a mistake, you can sort of get off very easily. I mean, you've seen a lot of time over the last couple of years. People make a mistake at Russia, for example, even somewhere like Abu Dhabi, and they go a few meters off the track and they just get back on and it's all good. But if that was a classic track, that was an older track, something, maybe not Monaco, because that's obviously an easy one to use, but even something like Spa in a lot of ways, even though obviously it's become a bit more of a modern facility, if you make a mistake at Spa, a lot of the time, you're sort of off the track and you're probably going to be hitting a tyre wall. And I personally feel that that's what we should be going for, maybe in a little bit of a way, a bit like Hungary, but Hungary just doesn't provide great racing. But there's just something about these autodromes, that the fact that drivers can floor it off the track to get back onto the track and not even lose any time, that always gets to me a little bit. I always don't like that. So I feel like we should be going to tracks that have less of runoff areas at least, because let's be honest, a lot of these Monday tracks that come into Formula 1 have massive runoff areas, enabling drivers to do silly things and just get away scot-free. So personally, that's why I take Russia or the Sochi track off the calendar, but I do actually think that we should still have a Russian track on the calendar. But I guess you think, where could we have this track if it wasn't at Sochi? Now we're getting to the last two on this list here, and I was contemplating a few. I was thinking about Abu Dhabi and I was thinking about Baku. I feel like Baku has actually provided some alright racing over the last couple of years. Yes, just because it's insane, but a street track in Formula 1 I guess is never a terrible thing if it comes off right. And for some reason Baku, it wasn't great in the first year, don't get me wrong, 2016 was boring, but 2017 and 2018, I guess it's just because of the drama, definitely was somewhat interesting. And Abu Dhabi, I don't know, there's something about Abu Dhabi I do actually quite like. I can't really put my finger on it, I don't really know why, but I do quite like the track. And don't get me wrong, it's an autodrome, and I'm going to the points I'm saying about Russia, I should be highlighting that for Abu Dhabi as well. And it is true, because you can still make big mistakes at Abu Dhabi and just get away from it. But I decided not to include both these tracks in the calendar because now and again they have provided some interesting racing. Baku obviously over the last couple of years, and Abu Dhabi has actually turned into a bit of a pivotal moment in a lot of championship deciders over the last couple of years. So I don't know if that's just because it's a more emotional thing, whether it's not being a particularly good track, but just emotionally it seems to provide some pretty interesting storylines of Formula 1. So maybe that's the reason why I'm saying it should stay on the calendar. So now for my last two I've put on this list, which I personally feel should be removed. I put down China, Shanghai. Now don't get me wrong, this isn't a terrible track. I feel like there have been worse tracks on the Formula 1 calendar than Shanghai. And I feel, once again, we should be obviously targeting that audience, because China, obviously a massive population. I feel like we should be having a race in China. But there's something about Shanghai which, I don't know whether it's just over the last couple of years at least, has struggled, for me at least, to fulfill me with excitement when watching the race, because it doesn't particularly have the nice corners and the interesting layout, and it doesn't really have, not the danger, but it doesn't really have a bit like maybe Russia, for example. It doesn't have that, oh, if you make a mistake you're going to be punished for it. Once again, it's just one of those tracks with so many large runoff areas. It just isn't sometimes interesting to watch, and I think that's probably my point here with China, is sometimes I struggle to enjoy a Grand Prix from China just because it doesn't fulfill me with entertainment. It just doesn't fill me with what I'd say is a great race. Of course, there have been moments in the last couple of years where they've been interesting. They have provided a couple of little action pieces here and there, but overall as a track, I feel like China is probably one of the weaker tracks on the current day Formula 1 calendar. And the last one I've got on my list is France, Le Castellet. Now, don't get me wrong, it's only just come onto the calendar, so we could see a enthralling race next year in Formula 1, because obviously the first race in Baku wasn't particularly great. But what gets me with France and Le Castellet is they had much better options, in my opinion at least. Magny-Cours, I thought it was always a really interesting race to watch, and I don't know why they didn't go back there. I don't know whether it's safety standards or something, but for some reason I just would have loved to have seen the race go back to not Le Castellet, to go back to Magny-Cours. But I can understand why Le Castellet is on the calendar. Don't get me wrong, just now we've got quite a few French drivers on the grid, and obviously I feel like they should be represented, but at the same time look at the track, it's incredibly confusing to look at. If you just look at an aerial shot of it, like, where does this go? I feel like in Friday free practice people were like, I've got to learn this track because I'm going to get very confused about where the turning points are for some of these corners, because there are so many different variations of this track. It can get very confusing. Now, I actually quite like the first sector of Le Castellet, but the second and third sector, it wasn't that interesting. So dear my5, of course, please leave your 5 in the comment section down below. Don't get me wrong, I was tempted to include Abu Dhabi and Baku. I feel like Baku has definitely redeemed itself over the last couple of years, but Abu Dhabi more likely could have been included on this list because it sometimes hasn't provided the best racing in the world, let's say that. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you did enjoy the gameplay in the background as well. Unfortunately the race ended under a very long safety car. I think half the race was spent under a safety car, so that was a bit annoying, but it was quite an interesting race before that. It's a GP3 2018 mod on the Norris Ring track, which I personally love, and I went to this year and it was a very cool track. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Thanks again for watching. Hopefully you have a great day, and I'll see you all around soon for another video. It's Alex Mardy. Goodbye.